Every day's the same.
We have to kill them. Kill them. Kill them.
I'm sorry. Every day's the same.
We have to kill them. Kill them. Kill them.
I'm sorry. Every day's the same.
Everything is exactly the way it was before. Kill them.
I'm sorry. Every day's the same. I'm sorry.
Hello. Oh, that's weird. Welcome to another episode of It's Time to Rewind, a podcast stuck in its own time loop, right along with the movies we discuss. In this season, we're taking a look at time crimes. Anyway, I am your host, Bubbawheat, from Flights, Tights, and Movie Nights, and in this episode, we are discussing Jess's third loop in Triangle that starts at 68 minutes and 41 seconds, with Jess running around as the third group of castaways, including yet another Jess, boards the Aeolus, and ends at 80 minutes and 47 seconds, with Jess falling overboard. Today, my guest is Lisa Leaheey from Whatever with Jason Soto and Between the Scares. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How's things with you?
It's going pretty good. I'm glad to be going through the end of this movie. It just keeps getting more complicated, and I'm excited to figure out how I'm going to keep all these different characters straight in this loop.
What I like about it is it's kind of like, have you ever been to one of those meditation mazes? It's basically a spiral, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you just kind of wander through a garden and it sort of sets you in a spiral. It's not really a maze, but you sort of look at it like a hedge maze.
It's the literal definition of a labyrinth, because a labyrinth is technically, like, the literal definition of a labyrinth is that there's only one path.
Oh, gotcha.
And the maze is the one with multiple paths.
I don't think I knew that. But a labyrinth will still, it's not clear which is the right path, correct?
No, a labyrinth is like you said, it's like one of those spiral paths where, you just follow the one single path. Those are technically the literal definition of the labyrinth. And then the labyrinth in the movie Labyrinth is technically a maze. Maze.
Interesting. I did not realize that. I learned something new. But yeah, there's one of these, meditation maze things in Block Island. And the hedges might come up to your ankle. So you see where you're going, but the idea is you sort of follow your feet and you sort of keep your eyes down on like the plant life and stuff, and it sort of helps you, focus your thoughts and whatever. And I feel like the way this film is structured, it's got enough of an element where you know which Jess you should be paying attention to. Mm-hmm. And I kind of like the way the loops themselves, they're not impossible to follow. Like, it's just the sort of thing where it's like if you put your finger on a figure 8 and you trace it, that's what's happening with the structure of this film. I feel like this could have fallen apart if they hadn't been more careful with it. But I do like the point of view camera work, and I like the way that we are tightly focused on one Jess in particular, despite the fact that we have others that show up.
Yeah, and I think you bring something up that I don't think I've really discussed too much, at least not brought attention to, is there are always 3 Jesses in each loop. Mm-hmm. And even though a lot of times we do see 2 Jesses at a time, we always know at what point in the loop each of those Jesses are. Like I refer to them as Jess 1 as the Jess in the first loop.
Mm-hmm.
There's Jess 2, the Jess in the second loop, and then there's Jess 3, who eventually becomes Baghead Jess, which is the alternate name. And you always know which Jess, always know at what point in time the Jess that you're looking at is.
Mm-hmm.
I think the only time is there's maybe one point in this where it's possible it could be Jess 1 or Jess 2, but I think it's most likely that it's Jess 1. But other than that, it's always very clear where in her journey each Jess we're looking at is.
Yeah, I agree.
And I don't think that's something that's easy to pull off. at least not pull off well. And this movie does do a good job of doing that. I think it's probably helped a lot because of, Baghead Jess is very clearly different from the other two. And then the other two Jesses tend to not interact with each other very often, except in like that the second loop.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. It's just this interesting way of sort of I don't know. It's kind of interesting to think about, you talk about Baghead Jess, and you spend so much time through the beginning thinking about, well, why the heck is this person put a bag on their head? And I feel like we'll get to that more in this particular chunk later on as in our discussion. But it's almost like this idea of, okay, so we have Jess 1, Jess 2, and then we have Baghead Jess. And it's like, okay, that's how we do this without CGI. Because how else are you going to put two of them in the same scene?
Yeah, and I think I did mention in the first loop, whenever Jess 1 and Jess 3 are having the battle that we'll get to again in this loop, that Jess 3 had very manly hands.
Yes, exactly. Did notice that.
But, let's go ahead and get started with this specific loop.
So where should we start?
So I am going to try and keep going, go chronologically here. So this time Jess had just seen Jess 2 throw the old Jess 3, or no, the old Jess, yeah, see, this is what I was talking about trying to keep things, because the way I've been labeling it is, after each loop, the main Jess that we're following, she goes through changes. So she starts out as Jess 1, and then she becomes Jess 2 in the second loop, and now she's Jess 3 because she's in the third loop.
Correct. So she is Schrodinger's Jess, where she is simultaneously Jess 1 to us, but Jess 3 in the loop itself.
Yes. And,
See, I know.
She just saw the latest Jess 1 throw the previous Jess 3 overboard after beating her seemingly to death. And so now
right.
She is seeing the new group of castaways, including the newest Jess 1, get on the boat. And she then, but instead of following them like she did in the second loop, she goes back to the back of the ship to watch the wreckage of the triangle float away.
Yeah, you get this impression that she's going to jump and try and get on the wreckage, but it's too far away. That's the impression I got anyway.
Yeah, that's actually what I was about to say as well, because she is trying to escape the Aeolus at this point, and she realized that she was too late to stop the newest Jess 1 from getting on the ship, and so she considered trying to leave the ship. And but this also does double duty, because her being in the back of the ship, that keeps her from interacting with the current Jess 1 or Jess 2, because the current Jess 2 is busy spying on the Jess 1.
Right. Maze at this point, where she's trying not to overtake the other one.
Yeah, and then she heads down to the engine room. So let me ask you, do we know that the Aeolus is basically traveling in a circle in time? Do you think that the Aeolus is also traveling in a physical circle, traveling in a circle in space, to where it's making a loop out in sea?
I think it would have to be. And I do wonder, I mean, you when you're going to put mythology into the animal here, I think that the reference to Aeolus and the reference to Sisyphus is significant with Aeolus in general. I mean, yeah, the whole element with the winds and, Bermuda Triangle and being stuck in that space, and, the wind is taken from them. I mean, if we go to the Odyssey and you think about the role Aeolus played in Odysseus's journey, he tries to help Odysseus, and he gives him all of the non-helpful wind in a bag, and keeps out the easterly wind, which is the one that's going to blow him home to Ithaca. And you have this element where he tells Odysseus very clearly, do not open this bag until you are safely on land. And Odysseus's men, who have no idea what's in the bag because Odysseus is still early in his journey, hasn't figured out yet that he should tell people things. They open the bag because they think there's gold in there that he's keeping from them. So long story short, too late, they let the wind out and they get blown way back off course. And when they return to Aeolus's island, he refuses to help them because he sees them as being cursed by the gods. So here you could argue that this ship is caught in that tangle of winds, where this ship is not going to reach any particular destination because the gods have been somehow angered by it. And Aeolus at this point is refusing to help them. So you could take this idea of thinking that, well, you screwed up, and so I'm not helping you. You figure out your own way. And of course, Sisyphus, the whole idea of the boulder rolling uphill and then coming back down again is her Jess being trapped in this loop and not being able to find her proper way out, despite how much she fights it and despite what physical and psychological strength she expends.
Yeah, and you know, we didn't really talk about Sisyphus much the last loop, but I do think that it is a good time to bring up Sisyphus again, because she is, we do get that sense to where she feels like she almost made it, like she got the boulder to the top of the hill. You know, Everybody died. She sees the triangle with everybody, you know, on the bottom of the yacht coming to the Aeolus, but she's not able to get down to the deck in order to stop them from boarding each time, or to escape herself. You know, it's always, it's just right there, and then they all get on, and then the boulder falls all the way back down to the bottom, and she has to start things over again.
Absolutely. I even look at that shot of the yacht out in the water when she's kind of looking through that window out the back of the yacht, out the back of the ship, and like that broken rudder. You know, if it were properly shaped, it would have been a full triangle, where this is sort of a broken triangle that she can't complete. You know, doing my best to make my geometry teachers proud. But, you know, I just always look at that shot and go, okay, what is it you want me to see here? And that's always what I tend to focus on. So it's a kind of loop, but, you know, this element of the broken shapes and her broken life and her broken ability to get out of it, I think.
Yeah, and not only that, and I was about to skip over that shot too, so I'm glad that you brought it up. But you know, we see her in that window, and then it cuts to, like, you know, the CGI long distance shot of the Aeolus, and we do see her as a very tiny figure trapped in that little window as the Aeolus goes off into the distance. So that's a good visual representation of her being trapped. Yeah. In this, you know, in this small space, even though it's this giant ship, it's this like small window of time, you could even call it.
Absolutely.
And then she goes down to the engine room, and you know, nothing moves. She's not able to change the course, to change anything in this ship, no matter how hard she fights, even though she is smashing with a crowbar.
That's such a useless scene. Like, I just think that scene is so silly, but like, I get it. Like, okay, I'll see you, you know, I'll lend you this, my belief of, oh, she's frustrated and oh, she's trying to do anything she can. But it's like, she doesn't even make a dent in a single thing she's whacking with this pole or this pipe or crowbar. I mean, it's really useless, which I guess, you know, I'll put my English teacher hat on and make it fit and say, well, that's the Sisyphean element of her, you know, inability to change her life and how frustrated she is with the fact that everything is stronger than her and yada yada. I can argue anything, even if I don't believe it.
Yeah, and then, you know, we get another shot of the open sea, and then a close-up of Jess's eyes. And this is very similar to the dream that she had in the very beginning while she was sleeping on the triangle, where she had the dream of the dead-looking eyes whenever she had the dream of her on the beach, which was a shot from the end of the
Little
the time
foreshadowing, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just her staring off into the ocean. This is, I guess you could say that this is kind of the moment where she, like, her soul dies. Like, her will to fight dies at that moment. And that is kind of where she gives in to what's maybe inevitable, to her becoming this Jess 3, this bag-headed killer.
Yeah, that's an interesting point you say that, because I would actually argue, and it's not in my clip, so I can't, take the fun from someone else. But I think that, the point where she officially, like, the soul is lost, the fight is lost, is going to come up in your next clip with the end. Because, we find out why she has apologized. Definitely dead. Like, there's nothing there anymore. Here, she still kind of hopes, but she's like, all right, I'm going to have to go through with, killing them. Let's see if this does anything. And, of course, we find out that's not the case.
Yeah, because at the end of the last loop, she came to the conclusion that the time loop repeats after everybody's dead. After everybody except for her has died. Whether or not that's actually true, or if that's just how the timing worked out, the movie doesn't ever make that clear, whether that's a false conclusion, or if that actually is what triggers the reset of the time loop. But that's what she thinks, and that's been backed up by what the previous versions of her thinks. So it's also one of those, like, self-fulfilling prophecies too.
And it's interesting, too, because even though she tries to do things differently, fate is still going to put her where it's going to put her. So you do have some of that, ancient in your hubris. You will not be changing what is destined for you, no matter what you try and do, and no matter how you try and shift things.
And I think it's interesting that we don't really get too much of a repeat of Jess 1, Jess 1's journey in this loop. But she does get a moment to spy on the current Jess 2, where she injures Victor. And their conversation is different. And again, this is going to be a little bit confusing, because the way that I decided to number the Jesses, their numbers change each loop. So it's more confusing whenever you talk about different loops at the same time. So
right. That's okay. I'll be able to stay with you.
So in this loop, the current Jess 2, which is the one that we're seeing talking with Victor, was the one that killed the previous Jess 3 in the last loop. And so she is telling Victor about the blood on the side of the previous Jess 3's face. But then Victor, he responds with the exact same line that we saw in the last loop about doing her a favor and not telling anybody about this.
Because whatever it is that's happening, he thinks she's crazy.
Yeah, and even though things happen a little bit differently, they still follow, like, the same plot points. So this is a moment where things are a little bit changed, although in theory, you could say that maybe this scene did happen the same way in the first loop, but we just, we didn't see that. This loop is much more similar to the first loop, because in the second loop, a lot of things happened differently with, like Downey and Jess's, or Downey and Sally's fate were different in the second loop, because in the first loop, they were killed in the theater with the gun. And then in the second loop, things happen differently. And in the first loop, Jess 1 fought with Victor. And in the second loop, Jess 2 had a confrontation with Jess 1 in front of Victor.
Right. Now I got you, yes.
And also, the final conflict between Jess 1 and Jess 3, the first time around happens, almost exactly the same as it does in this one. But in the second one, we see that Jess 1 basically beat Jess 3 to death.
Right. But what I think is also important is the fact that, so forgive me for saying it out loud because people may come at me and officially say, nope, I don't trust her opinion anymore. Groundhog Day is not a movie I'm totally thrilled with. I like the concept of it, but it got tedious to me. I think what they do well here is they shift enough of these smaller details so you don't feel literally that you're watching the same footage kind of thing over and over again. And I thank them for that because, there is a tedium to seeing the same thing over and over. And so you were talking about how we don't get a lot of the repeated contact with Jess 1. And I think that's just a matter of keeping the thing moving. I think there's a reason it's called triangle, bless you, and not square. Because if it was square, we'd have to do this 4 times. I think at that point, people would be like, nope, I'm out.
Yeah, and like you said, this conversation that we're overhearing between Victor and Jess 2 moves along much more quickly, and it's also a level of the film ramping up the violence and as well as truncating the events. And then, the Jess 2 leaves off by saying, "Don't be scared, Victor. I can save you. I know how to save you." That's Jess 3 that comes in. And she says, "Don't be scared, Victor. I can save you. I know how to save you."
Yeah, exactly.
This is just 3. This is, again, it's that moment where she has formulated this plan, and she knows what she has to do. And
she thinks she knows.
Yeah, exactly. And then we get to see Just 3's, what I like to call Just 3's cleanup routine. And she goes, once again into room 237, which they don't actually show us the room number this time.
Oh, that room number, I'm sure people love it, but it irks me. I can't help it. I'm a purist. That room should be 216, but whatever.
And, we see that Downey apparently did have enough life left in him to wipe off the old message written in a previous Downey's blood and start writing Jess.
Why doesn't, I guess, fine, suspension of disbelief, I'll say fine, but they don't show her wiping those letters off. Yes, okay, show me that she's the one who writes Go to Theater, fine. They do not show her. The editing couldn't have given me that one quick swipe, like the JES that Downey has started writing. They do not show her wiping that off. And that aggravated me. I'm like, this would have taken you half a second.
I can understand that, but... Well, it would take longer than that, because if anybody's tried to wipe off dried blood, which I don't know how many people actually would have done that, but I don't think that it would have wiped off cleanly. I think, you would have had to have brought in, the bottle of Windex and taken a good, it would have smeared first.
True.
And then...
Well, at least she could have obscured what it said.
Yeah.
Oh, that's funny.
And then, we see her getting rid of Downey 2 and Greg 2.
Mm-hmm.
And she leaves Sally on the Sally deck.
Oh, my God. That deck, I love that shot. I'm surprised Sally kept it together as well as she did at that point, because good grief.
Yeah, I cannot imagine. And then, the previous Just 3 had already gotten rid of Victor 2.
Mm-hmm.
And, although this Jess would still eventually need to remove Victor 3, which we don't. Which, again, that, what I just said, it's, if you're watching this for the first time, it's hard to wrap your head around where all these people are and who's getting rid of which bodies.
Right.
And, of course, I think there's also the magical realism where... we never see the cleanup of all the blood, because all the blood trails.
Yes, of her dragging them, exactly.
And of course the food, which we do go back into the dining room. Mm-hmm. And I did come up with a theory last episode, which this disproves that theory, because this is after Victor gets injured,
Yep.
but all the food is still fresh at this point.
Well, see, I don't see still fresh. I think the food refreshes with the loop.
Yeah, I agree with that. But my theory that I came up with last loop was I thought that the food and flowers all died after Victor got injured. But apparently that's not the case,
Yeah.
because Victor is injured at this point, but everything is still fresh.
Right. Interesting. Yeah, that's a good point.
And then we just get this brief moment with, again, this is Jess with a purpose. And
Right.
she goes in and just quickly tells Downey and Sally to go to the theater.
Which is such a weird scene in so many ways. First of all, you would think she would be a little less robotic. I mean, yeah, she's tired of this and whatever, but she's like running around otherwise. I thought the delivery of that line was terrible. You get a huge chuckle out of Sally saying, okay, now she's starting to freak you out. Because I look at this and I go, now she's starting to, you were freaked out by her on the yacht. I'm like, now you're getting confused? Okay.
On the yacht, she thought that Jess was just a gold digger, just
that too.
After Greg and his yacht.
Right. Instead of fostering the gold digger relationship with her friend. Okay.
Exactly.
Oh, poor Heather. We never got to know you.
Yeah, and now Jess goes just straight down to the armory. And again, this is Jess with a purpose. This is a Jess that has been roaming around this ship for 2 entire loops now, so she knows where everything is. She's not lost anymore. She has the layout of this ship down.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I agree with that.
And, we get a return of the shattered mirror. And, she's looking at this shattered mirror with a purpose. And I think it's interesting that she holds the bag up. And, the bag is basically covers up the entire section of the glass that's like the impact point, which is, we never know what caused this mirror to shatter. It's possible that it could have been a shotgun bullet.
Mm-hmm. Her punching it, maybe. We never get that from her either, though, so...
Like, my thought goes to shotgun bullet because, she has the bag of shotgun shells that's covering up that entire impact zone.
Yeah. She could have also, maybe been frustrated with, seeing her reflection and hit it with the butt of a shotgun. I mean, it almost seems like there are these little references to prior loops, obviously, with the pile of paper that she's been writing on and the Sally deck. And, we do have, obviously, this inclination, this information that this loop has happened more than 3 times. Mm-hmm. And so it just sort of looks like, okay, it's interesting, that detail about the broken mirror, because you would think, one, wouldn't that mirror have reset? It's surprising that there's a Sally deck, because wouldn't it have reset? If the food in that staging area, the buffet, why does that reset, but these other places don't? It's kind of an odd little plot hole that, frankly, I don't care enough about to debate over. I'm fine suspending disbelief in order to get the impact of the scene. But it's interesting to look at and say, okay, well, why does that mirror remain broken? And like you said, how did it get broken to begin with? But I do like that moment where she's staring at herself again, because, again, with the Schrodinger's cat reference, she's simultaneously determined and defeated.
Yeah.
You can watch that scene. It's like watching The Usual Suspects, and you watch the scene where Verbal Kint is sitting in the detective's office, and he's just looking around the room. And the first time you watch the movie, he's just bored. And when you sit in a room waiting, you look around the room. And then, by the time you finish that film, if you go back and you look at him looking around the room, you understand what he's doing. Here you have a simultaneous acting of, I'm exhausted and I've got nothing left, and I know what I need to do. Let's just get it over with.
Yeah, and it's almost like the mirror, because it is next to the coveralls that are hanging up. Mm-hmm. It's almost, you could almost look at it as the mirror is kind of pushing the idea on her, like the ship itself is pushing this idea on her. And in the last loop, she screamed F you and fought it.
Mm-hmm.
And then in this loop, she's accepting it.
Right. And it's interesting because it's not an acceptance that she's in control of, if that makes sense. It's a forced acceptance as opposed to, okay, I'll take this on. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. And then, she leaves and she puts the bag over her head and makes her way to group 1, where she overhears Jess 1 talking to Greg. This is the third time that we've heard this conversation. Basically, at this point, Jess 2 and Jess 3 trade places here. Because in the last loop, we heard that she heard the beginning of this conversation about the blood on the mirror, and then she runs off down to the armory, and she hears the rest of her conversation, either as echoes through the hall, or she hears it as a memory in her head.
Mm-hmm.
And this time, this Jess 3, she came from the armory, and she's going to this hallway with Greg and Jess 1, and she's hearing the latter half of the conversation in person.
Right.
So I like that, if you're watching this multiple times, there is at least some sense of where all 3 Jesses are at each point in time. So at
Yes.
this point, we do know where all 3 Jesses are. We know that, that Jess 1 and Jess 3 are here in the hallway listening to the conversation with Greg, and Jess 2 has just gone down into the armory to see the scraps of paper in the pile of necklaces.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they do a good job orienting you to where things are, which I appreciate, because they don't take an exhaustive amount of time to do that. It's just a quick little overhearing, and it's like, oh yeah, I remember that now. Let's keep going. So I do appreciate the way they managed all of that.
And this is like one of the few. There's not a whole lot of events that we see like in full repetition all 3 loops. And this conversation, I think, is one of them, with the, where they, again, bring up Jess's son. And I think that is important. We get to hear her say that her son is her world.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And, in a way, this is all about getting back to her son, to where, I haven't asked you yet, but how much of a memory do you think that Jess retains during each repetition of the larger loop?
No, she doesn't. I don't think that they retain memory in the larger loop at all.
So you think that it is, like her memory is, like Jay Clue, I like his idea that whenever she sleeps in the triangle, takes that nap in the triangle, that's kind of where her memories of the larger loop get drained away, as if the rest of it was a dream.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with you on that. I think that because of what ultimately happens, a specific confrontation in the end of the film, or the close to the end of the film, in the home, I think there is a dispatching of whatever memory might be there, for additional Jesses, if you will.
And then we get this Jess 3 confronting Greg on the balcony of the theater, and I like the fact that Greg initially thinks that it's a guy until his eyes eventually wander down to her shoes, and then as soon as he sees her shoes, it doesn't just register that it's a woman, but he immediately recognizes her shoes as Jess's shoes.
Which is, I mean, again, that was another one of those suspension of disbelief moments, because you go back to, Morgan Freeman in Shawshank Redemption, and, really, how often do you look at a man's shoes? I'm sorry, if somebody's got a shotgun on me, I'm not going to check out what footwear they've got. So I found that a little bit like, okay, plot device, I'll let you have that one.
Well, I'm not, I think that the scene goes on long enough that it gives him a moment to Like he's staring directly at her head for most of it, but then as the conversation goes on, it's like he starts looking around, like he starts looking down, like he's starting to look for something in order to resolve this conflict.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that makes sense. And so, he starts looking down and then sees her shoes.
That's fair.
And, this is a woman that he, invited basically as a date. So it's someone that he likes
Mm-hmm.
romantically. And so I can see that he would have noticed her shoes on the ship.
Fair. I don't know that I agree with that, but I'll take it. I don't know that people, I mean, I don't notice some people's shoes. Why would a prospective date notice my shoes? I don't know. I think Sally knew damn well what kind of shoes Jess was wearing, but I don't know that Greg would have paid attention.
Okay, yeah, I can contentially go with that. And then this is where we get into the conversation about why she put the bag over her head. And she has the line, "This is not me."
Yes. Which I get. I'm okay with.
Yeah, and this is where we get a little bit more of her motivation, where this Jess, she feels like she's already lost. And
right.
She is not trying to save herself anymore. She is trying to save the next Jess.
Yeah, which is interesting. There's a sort of selfless element to that. So I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and so in her mind, if she kills everybody, including the other Jesses, then it'll reset again, and then maybe she'll be able to get to the deck in time in order to stop the next group from ever getting on the Aeolus, because that is what her plan is in her head.
Mm-hmm. Because eventually somebody will get home to her son.
Mm-hmm.
At least she hopes.
And then the other thing that I notice, which it bugs me a little bit, but I almost think it is perfectly in line with Sally's personality, is after Jess shoots Greg and he falls over the balcony and falls down, we almost immediately hear Sally say, Sally sees just one walk in, which we don't see it as a viewer, because I also like the fact that at this point the camera remains on just three on the balcony, and we only hear them talking down below because we've seen it twice.
Right.
But Sally's first line is, "He said you shot him."
Mm-hmm.
But in none of the loops do we ever hear Greg say anything when he falls from the balcony, and it seems like Greg is just immediately dead.
Right. I mean, he lands pretty hard. I don't think his consciousness does not survive that fall, but like you, I'm willing to allow that to go by.
Yeah, I feel like this is another element of Sally's bias against Jess. That she always thought that Jess was a crazy bitch from the very beginning, and so
Absolutely.
This is like her excuse. Even though Greg didn't say anything, she's gonna say, "Well, Greg said you shot him."
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which is just ridiculous, but sure.
Yeah,
it's fun, and I'll play.
And we get just three reloading from the balcony, and again we don't see anything until we just catch the briefest glimpse of just one running out the door at the very end. And again, we don't know for sure, but I think we can assume that this again follows the first loop. So I think it's safe to assume that she possibly killed Downey and Sally here with the shotgun. Mm-hmm. But you could also...
A little cathartic.
Yeah. I mean, you could also theorize that, maybe she just injured them, and... No, because they were... In the second loop, they were completely uninjured whenever Jess 2 spoke to them. So, if you think of it that way, Sally is only making it to the Sally deck on every second loop of each group of 3. So this larger loop has happened, 40 or 50 times.
Definitely.
And so each smaller loop would have happened, 120 to 150 times.
Yes.
So this is
it's a math horror movie. It's like a cube.
Yeah. Well, it's a triangle. There's three.
There are.
And I do like how this fight between them is very similar. In fact, some of the shots I think are literally the same shots.
Yeah. Oh, I agree. I mean, that's easier. It's easy. That makes sense to me. Like, instead of trying to reproduce it, just use the same shots.
Yeah, it's just edited differently, so we get more new shots of just 3.
Mm-hmm.
And we get fewer shots of the current just 1.
Right.
And
although I do appreciate getting to see her get knocked over the side with the shotgun again.
Yeah.
For some reason, the terrible person in me cackles each time. It's just funny.
Yeah, because
nice
there is so much. Yeah, it's like there's so much that happens whenever somebody runs out of bullets and then they throw the gun, and throwing the gun is completely ineffective. But in this case, throwing the shotgun at her actually does accomplish something.
Yes.
And there are slight differences in this version because this Just 3 has a clearer memory of what happened just two loops ago.
Right.
And so whenever Just 1 throws the valve down the deck, both Just 3s, didn't necessarily fall from it, and they both did come at Just 1 from behind. But at the first time around, which I did go back and watch the first fight scene as well, but the first time around, Just 1 had a sense that Just 3 was behind her, and so she swung at her with the axe.
Yes.
And missed. And this time, she actually gets hit in the face with the pipe. So Just 3 starts this fight with the upper hand.
Right. Just pretty good. I do have to give her credit for being, I don't know what the word would be, but when she's like grabbing the shotgun and, before she's just about to get shot and everything, I look at that and I go, damn, that's some guts right there. 'Cause I don't know that I would have had the chutzpah to actually do that,
Yeah, but I also think that's, and I talked about it the first time around, that her being able to move the shotgun out of the way at exactly the right time does also have to do with her having this like almost muscle memory, or like this sense memory, this dream memory of having done it, over 100 times at this point.
That is true.
So she has the timing of that down to perfection.
That's true. I like that.
And again, we get to see this shot exactly the same, only the audio is different, because the first time around, because we were seeing it from just one's perspective, the audio was very muffled because it was coming from from behind the bag. Mm-hmm. And so we were only just barely able to hear it, unless you have the subtitles on and then you could read what she is saying. But otherwise, it's hard to make out what she was saying until she gets to the kill them. Mm-hmm. And this time, since we're hearing it from Just 3's head, we're hearing it all very clearly.
Yes.
And she's saying, they'll return. It's the only way to save them. It's the only way to save our son. You have to kill them.
Right. But the problem is, we hear it clearly. Again, some of that dramatic irony. We hear it clearly, but we know from experience the first time that she doesn't get it.
Yeah,
so it's useless phrasing.
Mm-hmm. And again, we get the exact same shot of Just 3 falling over the edge. Only this time it's extended, so we see her enter the water and struggle in the water. And we see the sun shining, and that's where I decided to end this loop. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, what did you think about this loop overall?
I was happy to get this loop. I like that I get something sort of well into the action. I like that we're looking at something that we've, I was happy to get something that wasn't an establishing setup. because it allows us to delve more deeply into sort of the so what of what's going on. Some of that exhaustion that Jess is dealing with now that she's in the third loop. And it really does speak to Melissa George's acting here, that as she goes through this, that we do see the progression of what this experience is doing to Jess. So I did like that very much. So I was excited to get this one after watching the movie in full the other day and then coming back and watching this chunk to see, okay, which part do I need to focus on? You know, I love the elements of dramatic irony that get used in films like this, where it's not a movie you can watch while scrolling on your phone. Yeah. I like films that have more complex narrative structures. I like the films where you have to pay attention, like something is being told to you in a very specific way. And if you look away, your sequence is going to get all out of whack. And frankly, if she doesn't pay attention to every last detail, her sequence is going to get out of whack, if that makes sense.
Yeah, the detail that I've talked about before is whenever she's talking about her autistic son and how everything has to be the same, or or he gets upset.
Yeah.
And so I feel like there's also an element of her actively trying to keep things as close to the same as possible as she has in her, her dreamlike memory.
Yeah.
And to where she's actively doing this Sisyphean task to perfection, like to the exact way that she feels like it went, in order to get back to her son, even though that's just a temporary return. But she knows if things happen exactly the same way, that she will get a moment to reunite with her son, even if it's temporary.
Right. I agree with you. Like you try and put a key in a lock, and if it's not just right, it's just not going to work. And so one little piece just off center, and that therefore she gets caught up again.
Yeah. And then was there anything else that you wanted to say about this movie as a whole?
I think those have already slipped out. I feel like I didn't stick to my part, but hopefully you'll indulge me a little bit and allow me some of those slips. But I think I've kind of covered that in our discussion as we've gone through.
Yeah, and I think this film especially, it's hard to talk about each individual loop without talking about how it relates to the bigger picture.
Oh yeah, forget it.
and I'm perfectly okay with that, and I think I think we did a good job, and I don't have really anything else in my notes, so why don't you go ahead and take a moment and talk about where everybody else can find you online.
Yeah, well, you can find me through the Rabbit Hole Podcasts page, which I believe is at rabbitholepod.com. But anyway, if you search for it, it will certainly come up, because we are a huge family of crazy people who have many, many podcasts. And you can hear me on Whatever with Jason Soto, and you can hear me on Between the Scares, which is a podcast where we strictly go through Blumhouse and Jason Blum's productions one by one in order, for better or for worse. And trust me, there has been some worse, but luckily we are at the point, we are comfortably into Jason Blum's horror. So I am much happier with the films that we're watching now. If you want a good laugh, go listen to some of the earlier episodes where all I do is complain about the crap that we had to watch.
I haven't double checked, but I don't think I've personally seen very many Blumhouse productions, although I did see the Gem and the Holograms movie in theaters.
Oh, look at you. I have not seen that at all. I do have to say I'm not really looking forward to it, but
it's not horrible. I think it has a good message, but it is kind of a mess.
As somebody who grew up with that cartoon.
I watched it because at the time, my daughter was in the exact right age frame for that film. Of course.
That makes sense. I mean, I'll see it eventually. It's on the list. There are a couple that I'm really not looking forward to. A couple of a little too extreme body horror for me. I'm not into gross for the sake of being gross. I can deal with some gore, But when there's no real point to it except to make you squirm, I'm not really into that. And we do have a couple of those coming up. So unfortunately, I'll have to suffer my way through those. But luckily, that's not what we're currently facing. So I'm in a happy place right now.
That's always good. And as always, I am Bubbawheat, and you can find me on Twitter where I'm at Bubbawheat. You can follow this show, It's Time to Rewind, on Anchor.fm, as well as anywhere else that you listen to podcasts. We have a Facebook group, It's Time to Rewind, a time loop group. You can join that to talk about this podcast as it comes out, as well as time loops in general. And
Kill them. You have to kill them.
You have to kill them. You have to kill them. You have to kill them all.
I'm sorry, Lisa.
Every day's the same.
You have to kill them. Kill them. Kill them.
I'm sorry. Every day's the same.
You have to kill them. Kill them. Kill them.
I'm sorry. Every day's the same.
Everything is exactly the way it was before. Kill them.
I'm sorry. Every day's the same. I'm sorry.
The beauty of editing, ladies and gentlemen.
Of course. And unlike Jason, I actually do edit these moments out. So nobody is going to be hearing this conversation, except for
Fair
me.
enough.